Brothers and sisters, across the red soil of West Africa, something extraordinary is unfolding. For generations, the children of Burkina Faso sat in classrooms where their history was written in someone else's voice, told through the lens of empire, crowned with names that were never their own. But now, a new dawn rises. Captain Ibrahim Traoré has taken a step that many feared, yet millions have prayed for. He has turned the page, erasing colonial lessons and replacing them with the stories of Burkina Faso's own revolution. No longer will the young be taught to admire the conqueror. They will learn to honor the liberator. No longer will French victories fill their textbooks. The names of Sankara, of African courage, will take their place. If you believe that African voices deserve to tell their own story, hit subscribe and stay with us. Because what is happening in Burkina Faso is not just about education. It is about identity. It is about memory. It is about power. And tonight we ask, when a nation rewrites its history, does it also rewrite its destiny? In the heart of West Africa, beneath the blazing Sahel sun, stands a country once called Haute Volta by its colonizers, now proudly known as Burkina Faso, the land of upright people. For decades, its children opened French textbooks printed thousands of miles away. They memorized battles that had nothing to do with their soil, kings who never spoke their language, and triumphs that did not belong to them. In those classrooms, the word Africa appeared only when Europe entered the page. The black child learned that civilization arrived by ship, that progress spoke French, that wisdom wore a powdered wig, and somewhere between those lines, an entire generation forgot the sound of its own story. But history, brothers and sisters, has a way of stirring when silence grows too heavy. From the barracks of Ouagadougou rose a young soldier, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He was not born to wealth or privilege, but to a mother who taught him pride and a father who taught him honesty. When he looked upon the schools of his nation, he saw children repeating the words of their former masters. He saw minds trained to obey, not to question, and he said, "Enough." Traoré's rise was not merely political, it was spiritual, the spirit of Thomas Sankara reborn in a new century. Sankara, the revolutionary who once renamed this land Burkina Faso, had dreamed of a self-reliant Africa. He taught that true freedom begins not in the battlefield, but in the classroom. And now, Traoré was picking up that unfinished lesson. He gathered his ministers and asked a question so simple it shook the corridors of power. Why do our children learn to love the men who conquered us, but not the heroes who freed us? That question became a movement. Teachers, poets, historians, and elders were invited to reshape the curriculum. The aim was not to erase the past, but to reclaim the truth. Within it, to teach colonialism not as glory, but as warning, to celebrate the resistance, not the empire. In schools across Ouagadougou, chalkboards began to change. Lessons on Napoleon were replaced by lessons on Sankara. Children learned of the Burkina Faso Revolution, of the day peasants stood shoulder to shoulder with soldiers, of women who refused to be silent, of farmers who built their own future without waiting for aid. It was more than education. It was resurrection. One teacher said, "For the first time I teach history and feel my spine straighten." Another added, "When my pupils read about Sankara, they lift their heads higher." Still, not everyone welcomed the change. Critics within and beyond Burkina's borders whispered of nationalism, of revisionism, of danger. France expressed concern. Western analysts wrote that removing French history would isolate the nation. But in the villages, in the markets, in the hearts of ordinary people, the reaction was different. Old men nodded, mothers smiled, and the youth began to dream in their own language again. This is what African education reform looks like: not the simple exchange of books, but the rebirth of pride. It is the rewriting of consciousness itself. Because when you teach a child whose ancestors built empires long before colonizers drew maps, you teach them to walk differently. You teach them to carry their name without apology. You teach them that freedom is not a chapter. It is the entire story. And yet, beneath the applause and the headlines, a quiet tension lingers. Can a nation truly sever the past without losing part of itself? Can it build a new foundation when the old one still lies beneath its feet? The world is watching, and the chalk dust has just begun to settle. What happens next will test not only Burkina Faso's courage, but the world's idea of who gets to write history. When a nation decides to rewrite its story, it does not do so quietly. In the months following Traoré's announcement, the ripple was felt far beyond the classrooms of Ouagadougou. It traveled across borders, across news desks, across embassies where diplomats whispered, "He is erasing French history." In Paris, the reaction was sharp but restrained. Officials spoke of concern that this might distance Burkina Faso from international standards. Behind those polite words, many heard a deeper fear. The fear of losing influence, the fear that one young African leader might inspire a continent to question the curriculum of its chains. Inside Burkina Faso, the debate burned like the Sahel sun. Some teachers, trained for decades under French methods, struggled to adjust. They asked, "How can we teach our children without the books we've always known?" Others replied, "Because the books we've always known never taught us who we are." And the streets began to echo with the old revolutionary chant, "La patrie ou la mort, nous vaincrons." Our homeland or death, we shall overcome. Young people painted Sankara's face on school walls. University students organized debates about decolonizing the mind. Mothers told their children bedtime stories about African heroes, not foreign kings. And in that rising chorus, something powerful awakened, a memory long buried beneath imported words. International media outlets called it radical, provocative, even dangerous. But to the farmers, soldiers, and market women of Burkina Faso, it was simple. They were tired of being spoken for. They were ready to speak for themselves. Traoré himself stood firm. In one televised address, he said, "We are not erasing history, we are reclaiming it. The French Revolution taught liberty, equality, fraternity. The Burkina Revolution taught dignity, justice, and self-reliance. Both matter, but one of them is ours." Those words traveled fast. Across Africa, from Mali to Ghana, from Niger to Congo, leaders and ordinary people alike took notice. Social media filled with messages of support. Teach your own revolution. Even in the diaspora, in New York, in London, in Atlanta, Black scholars and elders nodded, recognizing that same yearning they had once felt in the fight for civil rights. Because this struggle, brothers and sisters, is older than any flag. It is the same battle our ancestors fought when they refused to be defined by those who enslaved them. It is the same fire that burned in the hearts of men and women who said, "We will not be told who we are. We will tell it ourselves." Yet, as pride rose, so did tension. Western NGOs worried about academic isolation. Some African politicians, more loyal to donors than to their people, warned that Traoré's defiance could bring sanctions. But the captain remained unmoved. He said, "If we lose aid but gain our dignity, that is a trade I will make every day." And with that, the movement grew. Across the continent, students began asking their own governments, "Why do we still study Europe more than Africa?" Professors in Senegal and Kenya began drafting new curricula inspired by the Burkina Faso Revolution. The story had leapt beyond borders, from one nation's classrooms to the conscience of a continent. Still, amid the cheers, one truth remained. Changing a textbook is easy, changing a mindset is not. Burkina's challenge was only beginning. The old world was watching, powerful, patient, and unwilling to let go. Because history, my friends, does not surrender without a fight. And as the ink dries on Burkina Faso's new lessons, the question now burns hotter than ever. Will this revolution of the mind bring liberation or confrontation? Will Traoré's defiance inspire a new Africa or provoke the old powers to tighten their grip once more? The world is about to find out. Change, brothers and sisters, is never quiet. And it is never clean. When Burkina Faso began teaching its own revolution, it did more than swap textbooks. It reshaped the mirror through which an entire generation would see themselves. In a small classroom in Bobo Dioulasso, a teacher named Adiza stood before her students with a brand new lesson plan. No longer did she teach about Louis XIV or Napoleon. Instead, she spoke of Thomas Sankara, the soldier who planted trees instead of fear, who told farmers they were the heartbeat of the nation, who refused to bow before any foreign flag. The children listened, wide-eyed. When she asked, "Who are our heroes?" 20 little voices shouted, "Sankara, Traoré, our people." And Adiza said quietly to herself, "Now they finally know." But outside the classroom walls, the world was less gentle. French institutions withdrew support. International aid programs slowed. Some neighboring leaders accused Burkina Faso of turning inward. And in the capital, whispers spread. Would this defiance cost them their future? Yet, what is a future built on dependency worth? Traoré answered this question not with words, but with action. He redirected resources to train local teachers, to print books written by Burkinabe authors, to teach children in their native tongues. He built partnerships with African nations that shared his vision, Ghana, Mali, Niger, forging a new alliance of dignity over debt. And while the West frowned, the people rejoiced. Because for the first time, their children were learning the history that had been denied them. They learned that Africa was not discovered. It was already ancient. They learned that knowledge did not arrive in chains. It was born in their villages, sung in their songs, carved in their stories. That is the quiet revolution taking place, the true African education reform. Not a war fought with guns, but with words. Not an uprising of soldiers, but of teachers and students reclaiming their truth. Still, change comes with a price. Some older teachers, educated in the French era, struggled to adapt. Some worried that removing French history would isolate Burkina's children from global opportunities. But others said, "To know the world, you must first know yourself." And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. For what good is speaking the language of the world if you forget the voice of your ancestors? What good is learning history if you never find yourself inside it? From churches to marketplaces, conversations began to shift. Parents spoke proudly of children who came home quoting Sankara instead of Napoleon. Old revolutionaries, their hair silver and their spirits strong, said they finally saw the dream continuing. And across the continent, Africans began to whisper, "If Burkina can do it, why not us?" But amid all the joy, a deeper question lingered, the kind that history always asks when nations wake up. What happens when those who once ruled you realize they no longer own your story? What happens when your freedom threatens their comfort? The consequences of this educational rebellion go far beyond Burkina's borders. Already, universities across Africa are discussing curriculum change. Diaspora communities in America and Europe are calling it a mental emancipation. And for many in the global South, Traoré's actions have become a beacon, a reminder that freedom is not a gift, it is a practice. Yet the road ahead is not smooth. Sanctions loom, critics multiply, the challenges of poverty and security persist. But through it all, one truth stands. Burkina Faso may be small, but its courage is mighty. And as the blackboard fills with new lessons, written in the ink of pride and sacrifice, the children of Burkina are learning more than history. They are learning destiny. So, I ask you, if you were in their shoes, would you erase the colonial narrative entirely? Or would you keep both, side by side, as proof of how far you've come? Because in the end, the greatest test of freedom is not in rewriting the past. It is in refusing to be trapped by it. Across the ocean, in cities like Atlanta, Detroit, and New Orleans, the news of Burkina Faso's decision traveled quietly but deeply. In barbershops, on church steps, and in living rooms filled with the smell of Sunday dinner, elders nodded and said, "We know what that feels like, to be taught a story that isn't yours." For African Americans who grew up before the civil rights movement, history was once a mirror that refused to show their faces. They, too, learned of Columbus, but not of Toussaint, of Jefferson, but not of Frederick Douglass. They were taught to honor those who never honored them. And so, when they see Burkina Faso tearing the colonial pages out of its curriculum, they understand. It is not defiance. It is healing. Scholars in Howard, Morehouse, and Spelman began to discuss Traoré's reforms as part of a larger awakening, the call to decolonize the mind. They wrote essays comparing Sankara's vision to Malcolm X's, Traoré's courage to Dr. King's quiet conviction. Different men, different battles, but the same truth. Freedom begins when you tell your story in your own words. In Europe, the reaction was mixed. Some saw Traoré as a radical, others called him a visionary. Editorials in French newspapers asked, "If Africa stops teaching French history, how will we remain connected?" But that question, brothers and sisters, carries its own answer. True connection is not built on dependence, it is built on respect. At the United Nations, diplomats praised educational sovereignty while avoiding the deeper issue, that for centuries, Africa's classrooms were shaped not to empower, but to remember its subordination. And now, for the first time, that cycle is breaking. Across the continent, the phrase "teach our revolution" is becoming a movement, not of violence, but of vision. And across the diaspora, especially among older Black Americans, there is a whisper of pride. We fought to write our names into American history. They're fighting to write theirs into Africa's. Two continents, one struggle, one heartbeat. Because whether you are in Harlem or Ouagadougou, the truth remains. Until you reclaim the right to tell your own story, you are still living in someone else's history. And as the world debates, argues, and observes, one question rises above all. Will this wave of awakening, this African education reform, remain a flame in Burkina Faso? Or will it become the fire that reshapes the world's understanding of freedom itself? Change, my friends, is never the end of the story. It is only the beginning of a greater test. As the children of Burkina Faso open their new textbooks, the ink of liberation is still fresh. But the journey that lies ahead is long, and it will demand more than courage. It will require patience, wisdom, and unity. Captain Ibrahim Traoré has planted a seed, but seeds must be watered with sacrifice. His government now faces the immense task of training teachers in a new vision, creating materials in local languages, and protecting schools in regions torn by conflict. The nation's budget is thin, and the challenges of poverty and insecurity are real. But the spirit that fuels this revolution is stronger than fear. In the villages, elders tell their grandchildren, "Learn well, for this land is yours." In the cities, young people speak of building universities that no longer copy Europe, but reflect Africa's rhythm, its art, its science, its faith. They dream of classrooms powered by the sun, filled with stories of their ancestors, where history is not memorized, it is lived. That, brothers and sisters, is the vision of a self-reliant Africa. It is what Thomas Sankara once called the revolution of consciousness. And now, under Traoré, it is finding new life. The road ahead will not be easy. Pressure from abroad will grow. Economic threats may come. But every generation has its struggle, and this one has chosen the battlefield of the mind. Because when you control the story, you control the soul. And when the soul is free, no empire can reclaim it. Across the continent, whispers are turning into promises. Mali, Niger, and Guinea are watching, learning, waiting. Even in the diaspora, from Chicago to Accra, people are asking, what if this is the start of a second independence? A freedom not declared by paper, but by purpose. Burkina Faso stands as the spark, small but blazing. Its classrooms are the front lines of dignity, its children, the soldiers of knowledge. And as the bell rings each morning, they rise from their desks, not just as students, but as witnesses to a new chapter of African history being written in real time. The road is uncertain. The world may doubt. But if faith can move mountains, then surely knowledge can rebuild nations. For this is not the end of a revolution. It is its rebirth. And the question that remains, echoing from Ouagadougou to the world, is simple. Will the next generation carry the flame forward, or let the old shadows return? Brothers and sisters, what we are witnessing in Burkina Faso is not just a change of syllabus. It is a change of spirit. It is the sound of a people remembering their name after centuries of silence. It is the heartbeat of a nation that refuses to be defined by the hand that once held it down. This is what true African education reform looks like. Not a policy on paper, but a prayer in motion, a calling for every African child to see themselves not as subjects of history, but as its authors. For too long, our children have been told that wisdom lives elsewhere, that greatness must be imported, that truth wears another tongue. But in the dust of Ouagadougou, a different lesson is being written, that the mind of Africa is not empty, it is awakening, that the Burkina Faso revolution did not end in the 1980s, it has simply found a new battlefield, a new generation, and a new classroom. Across the world, the powerful will question, the skeptics will laugh, but the elders will smile because they have seen this before. They saw it when Rosa sat down. They saw it when Mandela stood tall. They see it now when a young captain dares to teach his people their worth. And so I say to you, wherever you are watching from, do not see this as their story. See it as ours, because the chains that bound Africa also bound its descendants, and the freedom being written in Burkina's classrooms today is the same freedom that generations of black souls have prayed for, from Harlem to Accra. If you believe that Africa's story deserves its own voice, if you believe that knowledge can be a weapon of liberation, hit subscribe, share this message, and let your light join theirs. For this is the dawn of a new African education reform, and it begins not with guns, but with grace, not with power, but with purpose. The pen has returned to African hands, the page is open, and the next line is waiting for us all to write.